So, it's been a while since I've talked about Taylor Swift, but content warning. She announced her engagement last week, the same week that the lectionary has a parable about a wedding. Oh my gosh, you guys. She's always doing Easter eggs, right? Maybe this was a clue. Do y'all know about Easter eggs in Taylor Swift or other musicians' lives? It's where they kind of plant something that you might not notice, but that's a clue for something else that's coming. Like maybe on the last show of the Eras Tour, she wore the colors orange and green, which are the colors of the new album that she also just announced. That's an Easter egg. Other Easter eggs remain unsolved, like why, when she was doing the podcast with Travis Kelce, was there a little Pinocchio figurine behind her in the shot? There's all kinds of theories online. I don't recommend falling into that rabbit hole, but it is an option if you want to. Even Jesus this week is helping her Easter egg, right, for her wedding. Okay, back to the text. Today we find Jesus with the Pharisees. This is a different crowd than we're used to seeing him with, right? You've heard some pretty derogatory things about the Pharisees, probably, but Jesus actually had a lot in common with them. It's kind of like when we talk about other Baptists, we're like, oh no, we're nothing like them, but then we're fine like going and hanging out with the Catholics, right? Because they're further away in the family, so the differences don't feel as offensive. But the closer you are to someone, maybe the more intense those disagreements feel. So this was like a different kind of Baptist to us, the Pharisees are to Jesus. And so they have a complicated relationship. We see them throughout the Gospel of Luke. Sometimes they are having friendly arguments, friendly debates with Jesus. Sometimes there is open hostility. Sometimes there's even some camaraderie. The Pharisees actually warn Jesus a couple of different times that Herod is wanting to kill him, and they give Jesus the heads up to get out of Dodge. And today we find Jesus with them at a dinner party. This is a group of important, influential rabbis. Jesus isn't important because of his material wealth, but he's important because of his influence at this time, so he gets an invitation. And the text says the Pharisees were watching him closely. They're wondering, like, is he one of us? Can we bring him into the fold, get him under control, or is this a guy we need to watch out for? As they're walking into dinner, the piece that we skipped, that the lectionary skipped, has them walking into dinner when a really ill man with dropsy, which is some kind of like disease that involves swelling, is like pops up in front of Jesus. So maybe he's on the street, or maybe he's a plant. We don't know. But it's the Sabbath, right? So there's not supposed to be any work done. Here's this sick man. Here's Jesus with these very intense rule-following Pharisees. And he heals the man. This is what they're watching for. They're looking to see, is he going to break the Sabbath? And we see the story about that. You can go back and read it if you'd like. But they're not just watching Jesus. Jesus is watching them too, we notice, as we keep reading our story. They go into the dinner, they take their seats at this wealthy person's house, this wealthy leader's house, and we see Jesus people watching, right? He's noticing who is talking to who, where people are taking their seats. And once they all get settled, then Jesus speaks up. And he tells a parable. When you're invited to a wedding, don't take the best spot. What if someone more important comes and you have to move to the very back? Embarrassing, right? Isn't it better, Jesus says in my, paraphrase, isn't it better to seat yourself at the back in the cheap seats? Then the host might see you and move you up next to them. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, he says, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Now, he has just watched them vying for the best seats, networking, schmoozing, seeking honor. And he tells this parable and reads them for filth. Did I use that correctly, Jonathan? Oh, caught. Never mind, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Jesus, you're a guest. Don't insult the party. No wonder these guys don't like him, right? But they aren't the only ones read for filth. This parable hits us just as hard, probably. I have to admit that my first thought when I saw Taylor's engagement announcement was, how do I apply to be the officiant? Right? I'm not the only clergy person with that thought. I know that you see it in your own worlds as well, in your professional life or maybe in your school cafeteria. The social maneuvering to sit with the cool kids, you remember? Or get the invite to happy hour, or make the connections that will benefit you, get you in with the right people. It's all about who you know, right? That's the old adage, and maybe that's true. But Jesus says, all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Practical advice, sure, like how not to get shamed at a party. But it's not just practical advice. It's not just a social strategy. It's the whole gospel kind of snuck into this other innocuous story about a party, right? It's an Easter egg. It's pointing to the whole gospel. It's not just about a party. It's a picture of God's whole rule that we've seen throughout Luke's story, right? From the very beginning, when Jesus was still in utero, when his mother Mary sings her beautiful song about God bringing down the powerful, lifting up the lowly, sending the rich away empty and filling the poor and hungry, right? Starts even before he's born, and it carries through the gospel story after story all the way to the end, embodied by Jesus, right? Who he says about himself, I am the stone that was rejected, but has now become the cornerstone. Those who humble themselves will be exalted, right? The Messiah must suffer and die, and on the third day be raised. It's throughout the whole gospel. Quick side note. Luke thought it was worth noting, so I think it's worth noting too, who Jesus was talking to, right, when he gives this teaching, where he's at. He didn't tell this parable to the masses of poor and sick and oppressed people that flocked to see him. To those people, he said, you are blessed, you are blessed, you are blessed, you are blessed, right? But when he eats with the leaders, with the people of power, with the people of means and privilege, that's when he tells this wedding parable. That's who he calls to humble themselves, to humble ourselves. We all have opportunities for humility, of course, and because we all have places of privilege. And it's in those places of privilege that Jesus calls us to humble ourselves, not in the places where we are oppressed or put down, right? In that position, we are called to pride. We are called to rise up. Every valley is raised up, every mountain is brought low, right? This is the kind of theme of Jesus' ministry that we see in Isaiah as well. Jesus' instructions are going to be different based on where you are in the landscape. You see what I'm saying? You hear what I'm putting down? Okay, just making sure. Just in case we missed the Easter egg of the whole gospel that was hidden inside that one little parable, Jesus doubles down. Jesus escalates with the next story that he tells. He escalates his point by looking directly at the host, this is not a parable anymore, and instructing him. Next time you throw a party, Jesus says, don't invite your friends, don't invite your relatives or your rich neighbors, don't invite the people who can do something for you, the people who can add value to the party, who can invite you back to theirs in return. Instead, invite those who have nothing to offer in return. The folks who don't usually receive invitations, the folks that might inconvenience you, the folks that society ignores and overlooks, the folks that are out there on the hillside with me every night, Jesus says. If you do this, you will be blessed. Not because you helped them or saved them, but because that is where God's blessing lives. That is where God lives. With the poor, with the outcast. You want blessing? Your whole social circle has got to change, Jesus says. And really, this shouldn't be that surprising to those of us who've dabbled in following Jesus for a while, right? We know that this is true. I know that doing the wedding of a beautiful couple I met through campus community dinner, the groom who was under house arrest, who I would sign off every week that he was at church, that he had permission to be there while he wore an ankle monitor after being arrested at protests. Doing his wedding to his beautiful bride barefoot underneath a tree in a backyard was full of so much more blessing, so much more richness than doing some celebrity's wedding on a yacht would be, right? We know this. If you've been to God's family dinner, if you've sat down and eaten with folks and talked to folks, you know that that is way more fun, way more uplifting, full of way more blessing than going to some kind of work dinner where you're networking, right? Definitely more fun than going out to eat with a bunch of pastors, I can tell you that for sure. No offense to pastors, obviously. But the blessing is there, right? The blessing is not in climbing the ladder. The blessing is in redistributing the wealth, redistributing the power, and finding our shared humanity with all people, people who are so different than us. The blessing is in extricating ourselves from the culture of vying for the best seat, right? The best seat next to someone who is a jerk anyway, right? They usually are. So that you can get further in a career that you hate, or climb higher on a social ladder that does not care about you and will kick you off with no notice, right? Who's on your guest list, friends? What seats are you vying for? Today, Jesus invites us to recalibrate, to shake that up, right? To use our privilege not for gain in a world that is dying, we see it crumbling around us everywhere, but to turn our privilege into blessing, right? By sharing it, by living like we believe the gospel, right? That the world that we are creating is a world where we don't need repayment, we don't need proximity to power, we need only to trust the abundance of God, the love of our neighbors. May it be so, beloveds, may it be so. Amen.